Film was a lot about contrast because it is a relatively simple story, separation and coming back together, but it's just set in the backdrop of the Blitz.
Steve's such a wonderful filmmaker to work with. One, he won't rest till he feels it. Two, he's so happy to be presented with something that he hasn't thought of. Know that there's someone who knows exactly what this film is. You're there to add to the vision and give him more than he wants.
Talking about those sort of contradictions and things being edited together like that, Steve's just a genius like that. He'll just keep watching things and suddenly a new perspective comes along, and things like that happen when you're with him. It's an amazing sort of creative man, really.
Hi, I'm Josh Apter, founder of Manhattan Edit Workshop. Welcome to tonight's Sight, Sound, and Story Live Behind the Blitz. We are honored to be joined by some of the creative team behind Steve McQueen's upcoming movie Blitz, film editor Peter Sciberras, ACE, sound editor Paul Cotterall, and sound editor and re-recording mixer James Harrison. We are going to talk about the picture and sound design that went into making the film, and really the sort of emotional and narrative ride that you're taking on in this picture. It's really quite an experience. I really encourage you to go check it out. We would like to thank our sponsors, AJA, ACE, American Cinema Editors, Zeiss, and Filmmaker U. Of course, I want to personally thank Jason Banky and Janet Dalton, without whom none of this would be possible, because they do all the technical stuff and all you got to do is show up, hope that my dog doesn't start barking during the middle of the Sight, Sound, and Story interview, and make it through the whole thing. So thank you, everybody out there. And let's get to the show. Curious about creating high-quality YouTube videos? Enroll in video editing and production classes at Manhattan Edit Workshop to sharpen your skills and turn a hobby into a career. Start your journey to becoming a pro today. Welcome, Peter and James and Paul. Thank you for joining us for Sight, Sound, and Story. This is a conversation about Blitz, which I've watched most of. So don't ruin the end. Don't spoil it for me. Historical fiction that it is, I guess. Although, let me ask that question. Is this based on a true story, or is this a story that's sort of based around the history of what happened?
It is based on many true stories, I guess. It's kind of a collection of stories. All the characters in the film really did exist. All the events did happen. It's just they didn't all happen at the same time and to the same person. But you know, the boy George is the inspiration from him was a photograph Steve McQueen found while researching small acts of a little mixed race boy being evacuated, carrying a giant suitcase, and he kind of looks exactly like the real George, our George, looks exactly like him. So that was the kind of seed of the idea, and then, I mean, it's going to be one of the most researched films I've ever heard of. The detail is incredible that Steve went to, and to kind of bring London to life in that time.
Yeah, and that boy is a marvel in terms of just what an incredible performance. And he's probably not much older than 9 years old.
He was 9 when
that
was happening. Yeah.
Really an amazing job. And that must be it. Well, we'll talk about I guess I want to try to talk about the sound and picture as much as I can. I don't want to sort of separate the two things because I think they work very well as a whole piece. And I think what struck me the most about it was there are almost like two governing logics behind how the film is assembled and put together, how it tells the story. And one of them seems, the historical events of what happened, and the separation and reuniting of the mother and the son. But then there's also this kind of very, strong emotional logic that I find myself looking at things saying, all right, so I'm not in this time and place. I'm intentionally being, she'll see a picture in a locker at the factory, and it goes to the memory of, a moment in time with her partner, and it takes you. I don't want to say it takes you away from the story because it adds so much more complexity to the story. But I guess as a team, I'd be curious to know how much of that is part of discovery and how much of it is, presented to you like it's in the script. This is exactly how it's been, organized, and there's really no guesswork. And it's just, I guess I would find it hard to believe that it was really written that specifically. But please tell me, tell me about how this comes together.
That in particular, that locker, that was actually exactly as scripted.
Mm-hmm.
It was scripted. It's I guess the discovery is how do you execute it exactly? Especially from a sound point of view. There, I mean, the club is quite a departure from where we are. It's kind of the idea. I guess we were talking about a little bit is kind of like the way that memories can be kind of like an elastic band. Then they're a long way away, and then all of a sudden someone lets go of it, and it's present and it's right there with you, and it's kind of vibrant, and that was the feeling we wanted for that memory, that it just kind of rushes in and kind of hits you essentially. And with the drums and the club being such a spark of life after we've just gone through the train journey and the tragic ending of Tommy's life, kind of felt like the audience would need that just lift and that energy. And so I guess that's how that comes together. But the kind of craft of it comes together over a really long time. I mean, I don't know how long we spent on that transition. Quite a long time. We were working in the mix till the bitter end of a long mix. So all those things, it's kind of, the ideas are often there. It's just the execution can, it's discovery, it's instinct. I mean, Steve's such a wonderful filmmaker to work with because one, he won't rest till he feels it, and two, he's so happy to be presented with something that he hasn't thought of, and he's so great at. He will instantly know if it's right for the film or it's not right for the film. There's no umming and ahhing. It's like it's basically yes or no or yes and. It's never like, oh, let me think about that for a couple of hours or a couple of days, or like, it's just such a wonderful, freeing way to work as a craftsperson, to be able to kind of know that there's someone who just knows exactly what this film is, and you're there to add to the vision and kind of give him more than he wants, in a sense.
In some way, I guess I'd like for the soundscape. Either one of you gentlemen can answer the question, I guess. But there's a lot of very hard. It feels very, very hard and very, very quiet. There's this really interesting relationship between, the absence of sound and then like just the barrage or the perspective of sound, where, and I just watched this. So, there's this, you continue to see bombs whirling and dropping. So there's this impending feeling, something is coming. And when it actually finally does, we only see it from above the warplanes in flashes of very muted explosions, and it's very sort of, it's exactly the opposite. And I think this movie does this a bunch of times. It really plays with what your expectation is. When it finally does happen, it happens in a way that you would not imagine. Now, is this, again, something engineered beforehand, or is this something where you say, all right, how do you feel about this in terms of audio perspective and sound design?
It definitely evolved with those sort of sequences with the bombs dropping. I mean, yeah, you're absolutely right. It's integrated throughout the film so that by the end, the audience knows what it is, that little sonic resonance. And so at the end of the Café de Paris, you don't have to have that full-on sound. You just have a hint of it, and then pan up and it's sort of silence, but the audience knows, and it is more powerful emotionally there because, and we did that in test audiences when we were having test screenings, and there was even comments in the audience going, "Oh no," they just knew exactly what was happening. So you don't have to be really sort of literal with that stuff. A lot of the time, it's you just work it out, and the audience can do the rest, and it works very powerfully. I think the absence of sound there, but the film was a lot about contrast as well, because it is a relatively simple story, separation and coming back together, but it's just set in the backdrop of the Blitz, which was just absolutely terrible time in London. So it's that sort of contrast of bombs raining down and the terror and the chaos and the mayhem, and then the next morning it's sort of back to normal. People get up and they go to work and they have a cup of tea and they listen to the radio. And so it's always about that contrast of machines and war and nature and life and love, and there's all of that interplaying, and that worked really well, I think. I mean, it's literally some of the loudest things in cinema that I've ever worked on. I've been in this industry for about 30 years, and I think the start sequence, the fire sequence, is the most overwhelming sonically sequence I've ever done, and then it cuts to nothing. It cuts to absolute silence, and so you really feel that it's that lurch effect, and I think the contrast throughout the film's really, really effective.
Why don't we take a look at it and then talk some, because I have other questions about the transition from that scene. So lots and lots of questions there. First, it really feels like, and I wrote these notes, it's like a wild animal. It's almost roaring at them. The sound. So I'd love for you to talk about how you created that sound, because it's like crashing waves, roaring animals. I mean, it just seems like it's incredibly intense.
So it was a lot about. I mean, first of all, we mixed in Dolby Atmos, so anyone watching this, if you can, if you haven't seen it in a theatre in Dolby Atmos, then I'd definitely recommend that, because it does give you the immersiveness, which is just really effective. And at times, I know when we were mixing, some of those heat waves that were coming through from the fire, you could almost feel the heat coming off the screen, because audio does turn to sort of heat and stuff as it transitions. And it was quite impressive. Steve also had said about when the hose pipe breaks loose, about that sort of like being this snake that's whipping around and stuff. So he was quite attentive to that, and his ear is very, very good, Steve, and he really feels sound. So, and he feels rhythms especially. So as we were watching just that clip, I could, just remembering all those little subtle rhythms in there to go through one thing to the next, and that was really, really important for him, because he really feels the nature of sound like that. But yes, it was so multi-layered. It took a long time, that sequence. Usually in sort of action sequences like this, and I've done quite a few action films in my career, you tend to be very event driven, very precise. You're leading the viewer through precise moments so as not to confuse and overwhelm. But this film, by its very nature, Steve really wanted it to be a bit more messy and chaotic and overwhelming at times. He didn't want it to be unapologetic, really, because that's what the nature of war is. So for us, it was finding that balance of being messy and overwhelming, and at times, but making sure we didn't lose that little sense of thread of the narrative, and especially when the later scenes with George, making sure we didn't lose contact with him, but wanting to be fully immersive. So, yeah, it was. It was
probably the other thing. Sorry, James. The other thing to mention is that the omission of music there. Talking about action sequences and driving along. Steve's and Pete's choice to never score that part of the film was always felt very brave to me, and it really paid off for my money, because when you do get to the piano, it's just this sort of amazing moment. You hear that piano and you think, hang on, that's the point at which you realize there was no music there. And I think that is helping with this reality that Steve was going for, the overwhelming reality.
Well, then someone explained to me because it's almost like it's not purely graphic matching in the editing, but the sort of the ash and embers crossing, and then the streaking down the frame, and then complete and utter, like almost abstract chaos. Hopefully you can tell me what I was seeing before we go to this black and white, almost like home movie footage of a field of flowers, and then we start to hear the piano come in. I mean, it's almost like it's so unreal an experience that it breaks the logic of filmmaking. It just says this is no longer an experience like you'd be watching in the theater. It's just it's something different, something more. But that's just me. Tell me what it really means.
Well, I guess that is kind of the idea, is to kind of put the audience in the driver's seat for a moment. It's kind of it is intentionally abstract. It's I mean, the Daisies footage is a Man Ray artwork that we've licensed for the film, and it's something Steve felt really strongly kind of, I guess, represented the idea for the film, or the feeling for the film. It's not really an idea, it's an abstract image. So it's but through this sequence, it's we find out later that, well, you haven't found out yet because you haven't watched the end, but
spoil it.
you would know where these images come back together. They link to the end of the film, essentially the tearing white light on what is water, essentially, and the end. It's all about movement to get us into that, and that was crafted with VFX, Andrew Whitehurst, and he kind of put that all together. And there's this sense of not knowing exactly what you're looking at, and the flip side of a coin, chaos and a field of and peace and daisies, and and it's Steve's a very brave artist and a bold artist, and I think that's where, you know, it kind of departs from your, I guess, very traditional wartime kind of, you know, English telling of the film, and that's yeah, and it you know, it also again ties into the very end of the film, so it's kind of hard to.
But actually, that makes me that's encouraging to know that it's there as a, you know, sort of
Yeah, it comes
marker
full
to
circle.
finish
It
a
comes
cycle.
full circle, and you kind of start to and the shot itself is that it's taken from later in the film is another shot that starts in abstraction and then becomes very figurative and clear as to what it is, and it's kind of these shots that hopefully kind of hold a tonal value that's kind of, you know, more than just you know, words can say. It's kind of putting you in a place, and I think it's really important. It's, you know, it's very hard to, I guess, get the feeling of war in just like, you know, just talking about it or just showing it as literal as it is, because it's, you know, imagine the terror in London, just like walking around every day and the anxiety in the air. And I guess that's kind of the feeling we were trying to capture. It's, you know, even when people are just wandering around doing their jobs, having a cup of tea, getting ready in the morning, it's just this thing's always in the air, and it's like months and months of that anxiety.
There's a tension that kind of hangs over the film, and you're waiting, like, I'm waiting for something bad to happen to the boys on top of the train. You know, this is an opportunity to play with my expectation. Clearly, there's going to be a tunnel, right? And then they're going to have to rush down something, you know, like, I don't, whatever. That's maybe the most obvious, but nothing good can come of this. And yet nothing bad does, except within another 2 minutes, the worst possible thing
Yeah.
happens. So it's like, you know, it's sort of playing with your expectation. But what it does as an audience is watching it, it's like, I can't latch on to any sort of predictable narrative, you know, shorthand, and it's
Yeah.
unsettling. So the whole film ends up sort of, in a way, creating that feeling that you're talking about, which is, it's not it's you know, I think even James, you mentioned it's a relatively normal story, but it ends up feeling this tension of something, you know, could happen at any moment. And there's this sort of prolonged dread. Now, I think built into that is like, will he find, you know, will he find his mother? Will he get home? You know, so many horrible things happen to him along this odyssey. Some good things too, but you know, he just left the group of thieves. That's where I am right now. And just
That's where you left up.
yep. Well, that's it, because they're
There's
singing.
a lot more bad. There's a lot more bad to come.
Oh my gosh!
Spoiler. Just a spoiler.
I'll brace myself.
And a lot more good to come too. That's the
Yeah.
thing. That's the beauty of this film.
Right.
It's,
Yeah. I mean, I know. Well, I don't know. I assume they're reunited. Let's hope so.
Maybe.
Yeah, but let's. But I do see, like, he sees his father in Effie in this really strange way. There's this translation process where he identifies. You know, he won't call himself Black, and then when he, you know, says goodbye to him, he does. And, you know, like, I'm not sure how you create that identification, but it's in the storytelling to do, to
Absolutely.
have him holding his hand, to have someone protecting him, you know, and that's like maybe the most safe I felt in the whole film. And yet I
Yeah,
knew something
definitely.
bad was I
And
knew something bad was
Hans' music definitely helps us there quite a lot.
happening.
I mean, it's one of the few cues that doesn't have any tension in it. There are a couple of them, but there's very few, and that is one of them. And it's also, I think, just the, you know, just a wonderful performance from Ife. Just such a warm, is like a ray of light in the film. You know, it's the most. Yeah, it's the safest George is, and it's also the most he talks in the whole film. It's like, you know, you really get to know George there, and it's kind of, it's one of the more beautiful conversations in the movie, and it's just so lovely. And they're talking about something quite profound and really meaningful to George. You know, it's like he's a mixed race boy in a very white neighborhood, growing up in and you imagine he hasn't really had many of these kind of interactions with people of color in his life, and that's kind of quite a profound thing, really, when you think about it.
Yeah, and well, it also, again, it sets you up to trust the woman at the bakery.
Yes,
And then, and
that
then
goes wrong. Yeah,
yeah, no, you're really, it's like you're having fun with me in this, really, because it's straight, but you're cutting it thinking this is how someone watching it's going to naturally feel that way in that moment.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I'll pull back on that, and then it's like, he's delivered to that. I mean, the second you're inside that pool hall,
something.
something.
Well, the world kind of turns upside down there for a moment. We're under tables and we're looking
Mhm.
up at people from strange angles, and
Mhm.
looking
Well,
at mirrors.
there's a lot of feet walking, and there's a lot of, like, I'm low down when he's playing baseball and the bat's hitting the ground. Like, I'm low down, sort of observing from the earth up in this film quite a bit. So, I mean, these are perspectives that they're consciously shot, but are they organized in a way that exactly how this is planned out? Or is this, how much do you develop on these ideas as you're putting it together from a sound perspective and an editing perspective?
Yeah, definitely. I hadn't really thought of the cricket one so much, but definitely the pool hall was, there was many ways into that scenario, but we explored a lot of them. But when we kind of went, oh, okay, let's not play this in a regular way where George walks in slowly, and because we had all the coverage to do that, but opening on this it's actually a really kind of weirdly abstract shot. It's a mirror. It's a clock with a mirror on it from being shot upwards, but it kind of feels like the whole place is kind of upside down in a way. You're not sure exactly what you're looking at, and then you're under the table looking at George's feet, and then up at Albert. And we just kind of wanted to kind of shift the whole feeling of the world there for a moment, and kind of let you know that, okay, things are taking a turn for the worse, and we're entering a kind of an underground, essentially, an underbelly of society, and this is gonna be rough.
Perspective's definitely something that Steve had talked about, and the way he shot it a lot as well, from George's perspective, from a boy, so everything's quite low angle at times as well, and it's something he'd spoken to us about sonically as well. Just maybe George's first experience of being at that train station and being on that train, it would be heightened, it would be slightly over the top, and so the door slammings and just the cacophony of everything was just, we didn't want to go over the top with it, but it's just something that was in the back of our minds the whole time, that is sometimes we just had to do things from George's perspective a bit more. And
it seemed to swell. It wasn't overwhelming, but it certainly sort of became this more chaotic universe. But it made me think of this other metaphor, the coal. I mean, it's connected to the train, but it's not, it's him. I mean, so you designed this to say, I'm going to connect this to how he feels, because has he just said I hate you, or is it before he says that to her that we see that?
Just after, yeah, it's just after he says I hate you.
Right. So you've got these shots that don't necessarily relate to one another, except they do emotionally. And if you think about how the train's running, how do you put that together so that I'm sitting there going, yeah, that's how I'd feel too?
That's the wonderful power of editing. It's like we had those shots, and they were just kind of, we had coverage of the train wheels, steam, and it's, how do you use those to tell a story, essentially? And the coal was a really nice metaphor, I guess, for anger, but that's a very, it's all, I find editing's quite instinctual. You just kind of go, oh, okay, like you're making connections without necessarily thinking them completely through well, I do anyway. That's kind of, and then you post-rationalize why they're there.
Especially if they work, right?
Yeah, when they work, exactly. When you feel it, I guess it's all about searching for feelings, and when you kind of find a shot like that. And also the reason that shot works so well is because the sound works so well to kind of propel you and work along with everything else, and it kind of builds on the chaos and adds another dimension to it. And then, we kind of do the same thing on the way out. Rita's kind of totally swallowed up by the sound of the steam being let off and this kind of, giant cloud, and then wheels that are way louder than they would actually be. But that's kind of, building this sense of I guess that this is a profoundly emotional and incredibly difficult moment for Rita and George, and just how also not only for them but all these kids and being dragged away from their families. I mean, it can just to imagine I've got a 4-year-old, and just to imagine putting him on a train and sending him away is like actually devastating, just to think about it, let alone do it.
I don't know. My kids are 20 and 18, and I could very much put them on a train and send them away. I'm the exact opposite at the moment.
I'd be happy.
Bye.
When he's 16 even, I'd be happy. But like now, under 10, I mean,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And especially it's even more heightened that he's a mixed race kid being sent away to somewhere where a country town in England would be extra terrifying, I think, for Rita and for George, losing that safety of home.
Well, I remember a moment that scene played, and there's Rita's friend saying bye to her kids, who we meet her later in the factory, but you just catch her, and she sort of she just reassures Rita a bit there, but you've just on the back of her head, and she was kissing byes to her kids, and they were having a regular kind of a more loving goodbye, and really towards the end, Steve was like, get to say I love you, just at that last moment. And then so it went, she says I love you, George says I hate you, and it was just this moment. And it talking about those sort of contradictions and things being edited together like that, Steve's just a genius like that. He'll just keep watching things, and suddenly a new perspective comes along, and it feels such a clean and clear little moment. But it just can't, these things just happen around him, things like that happen when you're with him. It's amazing sort of creative man, really.
I sort of got into VFX by accident. I always had a technical interest in photography, and especially as it relates to movie making. There's something magical about the ability to believe something is happening when it isn't. So I went as a live action producer into a company called Bob Abel and Associates. Then I would have to, have a meeting about how do we do this effect that's in this commercial, and I never got the straight answer I was looking for. I have camera knowledge, so it's like, since it's kind of ambiguous, why don't I just grab a camera and we'll try it out. You have to figure out what tells the story and use every trick in the book to solve your problem. I am Rob Legato, and this is my course on visual effects.
There was a flashback in there. It was the one, I guess it's cricket. I called it baseball. I'm sorry about that. I was going to call it stickball, but I knew it wasn't that.
We knew what you meant.
Yeah, but it's an interesting transition, and I didn't realize, by the way, that this, at one point she says my son went away earlier today, and I could not believe that this was all happening over the course of one. It just seemed impossible and even more heartbreaking that all of this happened in one day. But she's working at the factory. The BBC sort of rolls in, and I don't know if I think it's like a long dissolve. It's sort of like, and it goes to, I think he's on the train before he has the cricket flashback. But
right, it's the first racist kids kind of say you look like my dog. giving him a hard time, missing mummy and all that
But
stuff.
he learns how to handle himself. That flashback is about his grandfather teaching him about, right? Because he's
it's about, the flashback's about home and where, you know, where he's the most comfortable, where he's loved, where he's safe. And that's the reason he jumps off the train and wants to go back there, because, you know, he can see what's coming, and he doesn't, he wants to change the path of where that's going to take him.
Yeah. And there are a number of scenes where they're like, you know, where it's just, we're with them playing piano and singing, and, you know, I don't think that it's meant to achieve anything, you know, more than to see that feeling, right? It's just, there's a lot of love here. And, you know, you can sort of like, you know, it just makes it very tangible that way. But it's not like you're not supposed to climb the narrative ladder 2 rungs for going to that scene. It serves a completely different purpose.
No, most of the flashbacks are really, I mean, the Marcus one is a little different because we learn who George's dad was and how he was handled and what happened to him. But even that one's about, you know, they're very emotional. Like, they serve a very emotional purpose. They're not really there to kind of like inform the plot in a sense. It's more the kind of the emotional pull between them and the bond between them and what they're fighting for, essentially, and what they're fighting to get back.
We can look at the Show Me the Way clip. Although I guess we'll talk about because I think what happens directly preceding it, I found to be, you know, I mean, like I said, I just watched that, but it seems like, you know, there's an intensity of that scene that was like, as if you are climbing a ladder in terms of the storytelling, it's almost like if the bombs are, you know, to me, the bombs that we've been seeing the whole time were those. In my, you know, whether it was just in my head that I'm creating that, or if you're using a technique where each time we see them, you know, it's literally supposed to be a flash forward to that particular moment in the story. But for me, like, they're a marker, and I keep following, like, well, you know, when they're not just dividing the story, they're telling me to pay attention because something about them is going to reveal something bigger. But why don't we watch the Show Me the Way clip? And then we can talk a little bit about Oh Johnny and in the club and how we got there, okay? Tell me a bit about, I mean, to me, I'm not quite sure why that clip was because what I had watched just prior to that, but talk to me about that scene, but maybe we'll back up a little bit and afterwards and we'll get to that scene.
I mean, I think it just, the way Pete and Steve put that together, it just flows so nicely, and it goes from the Café de Paris back to Saoirse, and then links it. After that, you won't have seen that yet, but then we go straight back to George again. It's just this building up, it's ramping up. The pacing is just getting a bit quicker. There's more at stake as well, and it's just building. It's in the final stages. We're in the last act of the film, and so it just really, the pacing is just phenomenal. It just helps to ramp up everything. And that scene in particular, you've got that contrast of everyone just singing that song, "Show Me the Way to Go Home," just trying to keep calm, and you've got this chaos and just this fear of everything just collapsing in on you as some of the bomb hits are closer, some of them are more distant, and so we've just got this layering of effects there as well. So yeah, in amongst the whole building of going from the Café de Paris to the next scenes, that you will see. So it's all about the arc of that moment sonically as well to get us into the next moments and link them together as well.
The score is an echo of the song that they're singing at the cafe, right? After when we go back with the scavengers.
Yeah, it's kind of like a funeral version of it, kind of like is it a dirge? I'm not sure the technical name. Do you guys know what that would be called? Anyway, it's a slow solo trumpet. It's like the last bugle on the battlefield. Kind of,
right. Yeah.
You know? Yeah, that was Steve's idea very early on. Because that tune that is playing that in the jazz club is what was actually playing in the Café de Paris. That was the final song played in the Café de Paris when the bomb fell. So that's all historically accurate.
Yeah, down to the bandmaster. The name of the bandmaster.
Yeah, Snake Hips.
He was a very well-known character around town.
Yeah, and Oh Johnny was the final tune when the bomb fell through, because that's an underground club and the bomb fell through like an air vent. Essentially, it was supposed to be kind of like almost like a club in a bunker, but there was an air vent that a bomb managed to fall through, which is kind of pretty crazy. So that's all very much on, like, historically very, very accurate. And old Snake Hips died, and he was kind of a famous musician at the time, kind of band leader. He's interesting to read about if you ever just want to dig into some of these characters, because it's fascinating figure of the time as well.
How did they know that was the last song that played? Was it being
broadcast? Because there were survivors. Not everyone died. So it's kind of that's all based on tellings of witness tellings of the story.
One thing I really liked about Hans's score there, when he takes over in the aftermath of in the Café de Paris, you've got that little solo trumpet, and sometimes just at the end of those notes, he just does a tiny little bend with the trumpet, and it's almost like just a reference to the bombs falling or the sirens. It's really subtle. You have to really listen out for it, but it's just really amazing. I really love that. It's just those little attentions to details. It's great.
No, there's so many. And I imagine you're all very plugged into those details and how they contribute to sort of telling this story in its the fullest way possible, knowing that people will be sitting there lost in the story, not writing notes like, oh, the trumpet bent, it's not meant to be intellectually perceived.
No, I think that's the sort of the thing about all of the crafts, really, from costume through to editing and sound. The costumes that they're all authentic, the way they've been made, the materials that have been used, the uniforms, things like that. And on all of our little parts that we play, we don't expect everybody to hear everything, but we hope that for everybody paying as much attention as they can to every moment, then it comes across as a whole to the viewer, that you couldn't possibly ingest and intellectualize all of those things, but in trying to make a real world, we just feel like that's how it comes together, and it's the sum of its parts, really, rather than breaking it down into its parts.
Yeah, that's what we're here for.
Yeah.
But I think it's cumulative that and you can tell when you're in good hands.
You do in a film, don't you? An opening of a film, often you're either in or out at that point. You just think, this is, exactly that. I always have that feeling. I'm in safe hands, or I'm not sure. And once you're not sure, it's hard to come back again, really. So I'm glad you did feel in good hands.
You don't want to second guess the decisions that are being made while you're watching a film. You want to be completely, pulled in to the storytelling and taken on this journey, and have a feeling that it's definitive, that there's really no other way that the story could be told. But that's because all of you're micromanaging every single tiny edit and, mixing detail and sound editing detail. And that's just, you have to do, to sort of create that seamless world.
Yeah, and I have to say the detail in this film is well above average. I've worked on, not a million films, but I've worked on quite a few, and just the nature of this film with the amount of extras in rooms and sets, and just the amount of detail in this movie is in every department is kind of extraordinary. How much attention has been paid to every, including the historical accuracy and the research that went on for so long before the film even started rolling, and the script was being put together. So it's there's a lot to pay attention to. So hopefully, multiple watch kind of movie. I feel like.
Right. Well, I think that's, well, it's interesting because you can watch something again for other aspects.
Appreciate different aspects of the film. Sure. Exactly. Yeah, definitely. Any film that I love, I've watched multiple times. There's no doubt.
Yeah. No, I was telling someone just yesterday, because in Manhattan Edit Workshop, we have a workshop that, it's like focuses partially on the history of editing. And we watched the Odessa step sequence of Battleship Potemkin 500 times. And every time I watch it, I see something I haven't seen before. And it's just the nature of watching something like that. It's just, it's there for the taking. That's what makes it so successful. But not all movies are. Not all
movies. No. We've got to celebrate the ones that are.
Absolutely. So is that score, that ascending tone?
There's a combination of obviously sound design effects and score in this instance. Yeah. So anything is mostly in that higher range. The higher range of frequencies would be the score, and then the sort of weight is coming from James's sound design work with the water,
which again is quiet, and then boom, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we definitely wanted that shock factor and that sort of contrast. And I love those, especially in Dolby Atmos again, when George wakes up and you just hear these sounds traveling around the theater, and you don't know what they are, and those moments for me are just really, really good. And then it awakens the audience from this sort of little reverie, and then we go into chaos again. Working with water like that is always quite tricky because of the nature of water, which is just white noise when it's rushing like that. So it's quite hard to carve out and create sort of differences and variation and movement and space as well. But again, Hansa's score, he's very experienced. Obviously, he's done this a few times before, and he just knew what we were going to be doing, and so what he needed to achieve as well. So it works very well together.
And were you using, because the water has impact sound, so it's not just white noise, but is it a combination of that sort of water sound plus the something hitting something else, or what combination of effects are you?
Maybe. I don't want to get into too many trade secrets and give it all away. But But yes, yeah, definitely. There's definitely transients and sort of. I used explosions actually sometimes as well, just to give that main kick that you cover with water. Yeah, it's whatever you need to do to make it impactful, basically.
I think what I like about both the fire one and the water one is, although James has used some nice sound design elements, it feels very real all of the time. Sometimes, and they call for it. Some films use more abstract sounds in incidents like that to achieve a feeling. Whereas I think James his palette's always been a natural sound, which he's maybe mutated a little bit, but the reality is always there.
Even thanks, Paul. I mean, even the abstract moments where we had earlier on, my starting point was realistic sounds and sort of period specific sounds that I then could mutate and change. So I always like to have a starting point of real and natural, and then you can morph and change things up. In films like this anyway, I think you've just got to link back to something that's natural ultimately. And I think for me, it just plays better because of that, really.
Were you ever, just said this, I went too far here? Like
we were.
Yeah. And you were just like,
please stop this, James. We shared a room. We worked in the same building together. Steve and Pete were cutting upstairs and James and I were in the basement for a period of our work. And occasionally James's room was soundproofed so that it sounded good inside, but it didn't it stopped sound coming in, but it didn't stop sound coming out of the room. And occasionally I'd have 4 hours of and then I'd get a little knock at the door and James, I've been working on the water sequence, Paul. I wonder if you could have I know. I know. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's all right. All forgiven.
Yeah. Earplugs are for. I do have there is what, because obviously the moment where the hose comes to life and hits him in the head, I'm assuming that was a styrofoam, right? Like that's not recorded sound on the day. How do you do that? Like that's a very effective, but very grounded, very upsetting sound to hear.
It is, and it's something Steve really honed in on. That actually, he wanted it to be really vicious, and he wanted it to sound extremely dangerous and like it was really doing harm. Because those things are, when there's that sort of water pressure going through them, and they're heavy, with a huge metal head on the end of them, they're really, really dangerous. So yeah, I think my first instances, I was playing more on the fire and the water and less on the actual hose itself. And then Steve was like, we need to make it more dangerous. We need to really feel those impacts. And so I spent some time in the Foley Theatre actually with some precision microphones and high frequency microphones, and we were just getting lots of different things, and we were going through lots of different materials and just whacking things against rocks, against metal, just to get lots of variation and lots of different things. And then I'd try them out, see what works, go back, record more. So there was a lot of trial and error in that until we got something that was like, yeah, that sounds pretty lethal and right. And then luckily Steve liked it. So,
and I don't think there was an edit, right? That was, we follow the hose as it fills up, and then that moment happens, and you could cut for impact there, but you just let it happen, which I think adds to how vicious it is. It just feels.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we cut it afterwards for when he falls, but not for the impact itself. I mean, the stunty was really, the stunt man, like hats off. He was doing it all in camera. Like he was really throwing himself on the ground. So we didn't really need to. There is a little cheeky, frame cut in there just to give it a little extra.
Okay.
Like a kind of, George Miller type pinch of frame out, kind of, just to give it a little extra speed. But other than that, no. And it was kind of really about building that sequence up to the point where it's kind of so chaotic, and people are running and hoses are dragging, and so you're kind of not really feeling you're not setting anything up. So when it happens, it kind of grabs you in a more kind of significant way. So yeah, that was really fun to construct, actually, because there were other ways that felt way more presentational, and it just didn't have the quite the right impact when it happened.
It added to the futility. This,
Yeah.
you know, like these guys are then they do get the hose going and they're shooting water at this wall of fire, and it's like,
Yeah.
good luck.
Very out of their depth. Yeah.
It did remind me though of that movie Castaway. Had a moment very much like that where his colleague is in the plane and they get into that horror, like the plane goes down and he gets thrown against the steel door, and it's like it's presented in it's almost the same sort of plainness, but it's so vicious that it's, you know, it's like a horror movie, but it's, you know, it could happen. It's just there's something about the presentation of it that makes it very, very upsetting.
Yeah. Sounds like I need to check that out. That sounds fun.
You've never seen Castaway with
I mean, I have, but like so long ago.
Yeah, no, it's a moment for sure, but
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe everybody gets so caught up in the volleyball that they don't remember.
I always remember that thinking, wasn't it just Tom Hanks's fault though? Because didn't he drop the locket or something that he had on the floor, and he got up to get that, and then the pilot had to come back. So it was basically his fault that the plane crashed.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm not saying he didn't deserve what he got. Okay. But he looked great. Lost 40 pounds, ate a lot of protein.
Yeah.
And it's a
best diet in the world. Absolutely.
Exactly. Well, now that we've veered this far off course, is there, I guess, anything about the collaboration, you know, in terms of the work? Are you always working in a certain cadence and order, or are you working together all the time on different pieces of the film? What's it like to collaborate, or have you guys never actually met before?
We've never met.
No, we've never. We've worked. Paul and I have worked with Steve before. We've never worked with Pete, unfortunately. But it was. And it's always we don't know a new person in the team. We don't know what that's going to be like. But Pete just slotted in like he was always been there. He was absolutely great. So you can shut off now, Pete. Don't listen to this bit. I'm going to praise you a little bit. But no, it was just amazing, and the collaboration, because as Paul said, we were all in the same house, so. It was really good, you know, to get this call from Pete saying, "Oh, I've changed the cut, come up." But we'd go up and we'd have a little look at it. He'd explain exactly what he's done. It's like, great, fantastic. Let's go and fix that for you sound wise. And it was just that to and fro. And we would be working out of order in times and just working on what's really pressing and what needed to be done. But yeah, Steve and Pete would come down to us to look at going to Paul's room to look through some ADR choices and things like that, and then come into me and have a look at some sound design things. So
yeah,
it was
quite
just
an unusual setup, wasn't it? Really, very often there is quite a big disconnection.
Yeah,
might not be in the same city, even, you know. And
Sure.
as James said, you know, Pete was able to call us up and say, "Oh, I've done this because what we're trying to do here now is this. So we need can you help me with the link here, or I want to push this element here. That's what we're trying to achieve." So we could, you know, talking in the same room. There's so much to be said for that.
Yeah, there's very little distinction between departments in the end. I mean, it was really a very fluid process. I wish every film was like that. I found it so helpful, because often you're in the Avid, you've got an assistant trying to whip something up, and then you'd send it off to the sound team and they're in a different place, and you kind of go with something like this, and then but just to be able to just talk through ideas, and just, you know, this film required so much you know, thinking, essentially, like really working things out, just and that's just so much more fun to do when you're in the same building.
Yeah. And there's a huge credit to Pete as well, that, you know, we could say we're having a problem sonically here because of something, and Pete could go and help us in the cut with that, and that I don't think I've ever been a part of that before. That is amazing, you know. Or he would be able to solve the problem with us, you know, and make suggestions, you know, directly. You know, it was
fun. It was really good fun.
Yeah.
No, it sounds like the anti-pandemic where everyone was.
It really was. Yeah, yeah,
all,
yeah. And so
you know.
just from a sound side of things, we went into the mix. We kind of knew where we were going, and it gave us time to really experiment as well. Everything was still open, but we knew things were, we weren't worried about anything, but we knew things could just get better from there, really. And they did, they really did,
Oh, that's great. It
Yeah.
sounds like this thing, it was a living entity, right? A living organism, right?
Really, yeah.
Until the
For
end.
sure, for sure.
And it feels that way. I mean, that's that's what it's sort of. I'm watching it. It feels like quiet and emotional and ferocious, and yearning for something. It's like it's that's why I say it's really like, I know there's a narrative. It's a story of a son and a mother getting separated, coming together, but it's like there's so much. There are so many beats that are purely emotional, that it feels as much governed by that as it does by a narrative. So it's, obviously this is it's a narrative feature, it's a story being told, but there's so much about it that's, I want to say unconventional, because I think it strengthens the narrative to do it. But I admire your ability to draw that out and allow the film the time to focus on that, such as it amplifies that sort of the sort of relationships. And nice work. I'll definitely watch the rest of it.
I'm glad.
Put that on the poster.
You're just getting up to the good bit.
Well, thank you, James and Paul and Peter, for giving me your time today. It's always a thrill. Nice to hear about the collaboration too. I by the way, happen to agree that like you'll get 10 times more done in a day in person than you will in 10 days.
I think, yeah, across whatever your work is, I think, yeah.
So hopefully more films get back into that rhythm. And we had a place called Sound One in New York that isn't really there anymore, but it was really a hive for that activity. So you'd have people editing and mixing and editing sound, and it's just there was a real community of that happening all in this giant building. And a lot of stories coming out from, I think actually someone might be making a documentary about what was going on there. So everybody go see it in the theater, so we don't have to take a chance with your shoddy home stereo setups. They're never good. They're never the same. I have a good one, so that's not, I'm okay. I got surround sound. But I wish you the best of luck with it. And
thank you.
Yeah, I can't wait to see it to its conclusion. I will let you know if I have any other notes. We maybe have to do a part 2. Thanks again for tuning in tonight to Sight, Sound, and Story Live Behind the Blitz. Go check the movie out. It is in theaters now and will be streaming on Apple TV Plus or whatever that platform is called. I believe middle of November, something like that, maybe late November. So please do check it out. You will not be disappointed. Once again, I'd like to thank our sponsors, AJA, American Cinema Editors, or ACE, and Filmmaker U, Muse Shop President Jason Benke, Director of Education Janet Dalton. Again, this wouldn't be happening without those people. So I want to thank them, but I also want you to appreciate them as well. So we will see you next time at the next Sight, Sound, and Story event. Have a great night.